now. So, great. Well, good morning. Before we get started, I want to go over some housekeeping. I'd like to bring your attention to the question and answer box on your screen. During the training, feel free to add any questions you have in there, and Michelle Chakowski from the Regional Planning Council will be monitoring that. And when we're done with the training, we will go over those questions and answers, as many as we can get to today. And with that, I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Regional Planning Council. My name is Tara McHugh, and we want to thank you for joining us today in an effort to make your business more resilient. Today's training is funded by the U.S. EDA and is hosted by Seminole County, so thank you to them. The Regional Planning Council, let me move it. Okay, the Regional Planning Council is one of 10 across the state of Florida. It's a council of government that covers 8 counties: Brevard, Lake, Marion, Orange, Osceola, Seminole, Sumter, and Volusia. The council works to provide a forum of regional leaders to collaborate on regional issues, and we work with our local governments to provide and other partners to provide technical assistance in a variety of areas, including economic and community development, emergency preparedness, and resilience. So wanted to thank you guys and congratulate you on being a local business owner. That's amazing. You all are the backbone of our communities, and you provide needed services to your community while also providing the livelihoods to your employees. As the last 2 years have shown, or you may have experienced through hurricanes or other events, interruptions to your business can have devastating and ripple effects if you're not prepared to bounce back. So we welcome you today as you take your first step in learning how to protect your dream and your workforce from these impacts whenever they may happen. And with that, I will hand it over to Commissioner Lockhart.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you on behalf of Seminole County and the Planning Council for coming today and taking time to learn about how to make your business more resilient. It's interesting, we use the word resiliency a lot, and sometimes we don't really realize how simple the definition really is. It means having the ability to recover quickly after any sort of stressor or shock. And as we all know and maybe don't acknowledge regularly enough, your businesses are truly the backbone of our day-to-day culture and the economic value of our community. So when a stressor happens to all of us, such as a tropical storm, something natural or man-made, things outside of the influence, outside of our influence, which disrupts normal schedules, not only are our businesses affected, but our entire communities are affected. You all are kind of the canary in our mine shaft, if you will. So whether it's due to a lack of power or roads being blocked or employees not being able to get to work, our community depends on your businesses for the goods and services that we need to bounce back. And you provide the livelihood for your staff and the team, and it makes possible for them to be resilient as well, and their families and the things that are most important to them. So your business provides that sense of normalcy that we need when tragedy occurs, and it's vital to bringing our community back together after a tragic event. So this workshop, which we're so excited about today, is going to help you think through and create your resiliency plan to overcome whatever stressors we could face. Your employees, of course, are your greatest asset. And we want to guide you today in making a plan that's customized to your business and your needs to help you take care of your greatest assets. The more resilient that you are after a disaster, the quicker you're able to resume your business, and the better and stronger our community becomes. So thank you all so much again for taking the time today to join us for this really important workshop.
And with that, we'll hand it over to Alan Harris, the Seminole County Emergency Manager.
Good morning, everybody. I want to thank the East Central Florida Planning Council, Commissioner Lockhart, for a great welcome. My name is Alan Harris. I'm the Chief Administrator for the Office of Emergency Management. Our business community is incredibly important to the county, as the commissioner just mentioned. All of our 7 cities in the county work together to try to build a resilient community so that our businesses can thrive, even when there are threats. And of course, we live in an amazing community here in the Central Florida area, but there are threats, as there are anywhere in the nation, but there are threats that are specific to our community. Here at the Seminole County Office of Emergency Management, we identified 22 hazards here in the county. So now some of the hazards happen quite frequently, unfortunately, like the threats of tropical events, severe weather, things like that. And then there are things that are less likely to happen, like if you're looking at the list, an earthquake. In fact, in 2010, I went into my boss's office and I said, if we get an earthquake, you're going to get my letter of resignation. Unfortunately, that weekend, Murphy's Law, there was an earthquake, but it was not here. It was in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. And we were the recipient of over 10,000 evacuees here in Seminole County. So Seminole County has responded to the effects of an earthquake, over 10,000 evacuees coming from the country of Haiti, as well as over 100 orphans. So we did have to develop and respond effectively even to earthquakes. And as you can see here, this is actually one of the planes that came in from Haiti. So when you look at the history of threats and hazards here in Seminole County, we have experienced a lot that were on that previous list. And when you look through this list, you can see where the business communities were affected. Just looking through the list right now, I can see Tropical Storm Faye in 2008. That was one of our worst historically referenced floods that have happened here in Seminole County. And in that event, bridge loans were activated here in the county, which helped many of our businesses in the Sanford community, some of them threatening to close their businesses, but are thriving today because of some of those bridge loans that were offered in the county. Trayvon Martin protests and rallies. We did the Open for Business, working with the city of Sanford and Seminole County and our business community in concert with each other in full cooperation, developed a plan for how we make businesses thrive even during that event. So, and you just go through the list over and over and over again, where we have partnered with our business community to make sure that that we can reopen, that we thrive economically, and continue to work effectively as a group. Here at the Office of Emergency Management, we have overarching plans. And as you can see, one of those plans is our Continuity of Operations Plan. And we also have a Post-Disaster Recovery Plan. Our Continuity of Operations Plan, or COOP, is how we continue operations so that you can continue operations at your business, making sure that permits are offered immediately after a hurricane, that we have emergency permits, that we continue to provide services, that we reopen roadways, that we make sure the traffic signals are up, that we make sure that emergency power is provided to our critical infrastructures, that blue tarps are available, that those things that are necessary to continue operations so that you can continue operations, we have those in place as quickly as possible and as safely as possible after an event. And our post-disaster recovery plan looks at how we economically can rebuild our community, whether it's open for business like we did in Sanford, or other types of bridge loans and things like that that would be necessary to make sure that your business thrives. SBA loans, making sure that those are available to our ag community during drought, is also just one of the aspects that we have in our post-disaster recovery plan. There are other plans, smaller plans. I won't go into each and every one of those, but I just want you to know here at the Office of Emergency Management, we try to think of every possibility that can happen during a hurricane, tornado, pandemic, whatever the case may be. And we try to develop response plans and recovery plans, resiliency plans, to make sure that we are resilient as a community, that we can rebound as effectively and quickly as possible. All of us have activated our COOP plans, right? Our continuity of operations plans in 2020 included working from home. Certainly, we all are familiar with these, the Zoom presentation, GoToMeeting, things like that. I think we've been very proficient with it. The only thing that I probably am not that great at is there's so many different ones, and trying to find where the mute is and the camera is on each one. That's probably the only thing that's quite confusing. But here at county government, we have a continuity of operations plan because we know that we need to continue operations so you can continue operations. And you can see some of the aspects of our continuity of operations plan here in the slide. We also have continuity of government. We need to make sure that our elected officials continue to meet, and also that the public can provide input to the decisions that are made here in government. So we have a continuity of government plan, and we have a continuity of operations plan. Continuity of operations plan is how the county operations continue, and then continuity of government, how our elected officials continue to meet and that public can provide input to those individuals. As important it is for us to have a plan, it is important to train, test, and exercise that plan. This is just one of those exercises, and just took place a couple weeks ago, where we had a simulated tornado hit our emergency operations center. We abandoned our emergency operations center, went out to a middle of a parking lot, and set up an emergency operations center completely from scratch. We've done that with our 911 system because we know that we have to continue 911. There is no exceptions to that. We must continue emergency services. We must continue traffic and road control operations. We must continue to provide clean and efficient and effective water to our populations. Those services are critical services, and we need those services to continue regardless of what happens. We are here, of course, to help you. When we look at any disaster, we look at our community lifelines. There's 7 community lifelines. If we can get those community lifelines back in what we call green status or operational status, then we know you as a business can continue your operations. So we are always thriving to make sure that those community lifelines are back in the green status so that your business can get back to work. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Robert. Robert's going to talk a lot about how your businesses can develop their own continuity operations plans and recovery plans. So I will stop the screen. Robert, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Alan. And thank you all for inviting me to join you this morning. Let me get the right buttons clicked to Alan's point. Okay, so do you all see a screen that says business survival planning on your screens? Okay, great. Okay, well, every day, business continuity plans will save, let me do this. Okay, so every day, business continuity plans save lives, livelihoods, and the futures of all size companies worldwide. So learning how and why will give you the confidence to build and as well as the trust in your own plan, and one that works when needed and makes a positive difference in the lives of everyone it touches, good times or bad. Well, this is important because after any disaster, through no fault of their own, employees at all corporate levels find themselves laid off, furloughed, or left to fend for themselves because the company was unprepared. So for example, in the current COVID era, just about every study shows a majority of individuals feel overwhelmed by current events and unsure of what can be done to regain a sense of control in their lives and in careers. So this can make fear, uncertainty, and doubt some of the greatest threats to an organization and its workforce. So what can be done to restore a sense of confidence, balance, and hope in our lives and the lives of those we work with? Well, that is the focus of our time today, finding answers for how to avoid problems and what can be done when bad things happen to good companies and good people. Okay, let's get some change. There we go. Well, my name is Rob Preininger. I started my company, Business Survival Partners, back in 2010 after historic floods in Tennessee to help make the region a safer, more resilient place to do business and raise a family. We accomplish our mission nationwide by helping companies build, test, and maintain all elements of their business continuity program. So that's enough about me. Let's go ahead and get started. So be ready to take notes as we move through today's content, and we should have about 5-10 minutes for Q&A at the end of our time together. So please save your questions until the end, and any questions we can't get to today, send me an email and I will reply. So we'll have 5 topics that we'll talk through. You don't need it until you do. Emergency stages, a risk assessment, and something called the business impact analysis, or for those who can't get enough acronyms, the BIA. And we'll do a pivot to continuity and resiliency. And then finally, a resource list that you can use. So I'd like to start off by putting everybody's mind at ease. I'm not here to tell you how to do your job or how to run your business. You are the experts. By sharing today's topic with you, I'm just hoping there is something of value that you can leave with that will contribute to you and your company's continued growth and success. So having a business continuity program removes uncertainty for the unknown. It empowers everyone in the company with the tools, the training, and the confidence to make good decisions in bad situations. And if you think about it, the unexpected happens in all of our lives every day. The babysitter cancels, the family car breaks down, a loved one gets sick. Well, the same is true for businesses. A strategic client jumps ship to a competitor, a key supplier goes into receivership, a global pandemic comes to our city. But why does this matter? What makes being prepared so important? Well, besides the statistics on this slide, this is one area of life and in business where what you don't know can and will hurt you if you're not prepared. So I often hear a statement, something like this: well, all my data is backed up to the cloud. Is this extra effort all really necessary? Well, enterprise risk is not just technology related. Active threats, failure events, and downtime come in all shapes and degrees of magnitude. Not everything that could take a company down is a fire in a data center or a crater where the office used to be. A mishandled PR event can be just as damaging to earnings as a direct hit from a tornado. And the lost potential echoes without saying. A loss in confidence in your leadership team and its ability to manage its risks, employer liability claims, destabilize earnings and cash flow, and even on down to a personal level where it can negatively affect the trajectory of a career. However, there's good news in all of that. And the list you see on this slide is also an example of the rewards of having a plan ready and trained, doing the right thing for the right reason, and doing it at the right time. So every employee has a right to expect that they'll be safe when they go to work. However, even the best intentioned company, meeting all of its duty of care responsibilities, can still witness violence within its walls or experience a natural or man-made disaster. It's an inherent risk of living in a free and open society in a fallen world. So what can individuals and organizations do to increase the safety of where we work? Well, part of the answer is attending ongoing training like you are today. And the other part is implementing a business continuity program. Duty of care obligations require company directors and officers to act in a competent manner and to make decisions that they believe are in good faith and in the best interests of all stakeholders. So having a business continuity program or a COOP program helps executive leadership identify and reduce threats to employee safety and business operations if, God forbid, something bad should happen. No one wants to survive the disaster, but lose what's left to post-event litigation. An act of God defense is not where any company wants to hang their legal hat after an event. A better approach is to demonstrate appropriate due diligence in your day-to-day operations by having a business continuity program active and trained. So risky blind spots. Risky blind spots develop when risk forecasting and management are allowed to fade into the background. This potentially seduces boards and officers into viewing such considerations as perhaps unimportant or irrelevant. That'll never happen here, right? That's one of my favorites. However, if unaddressed, when things do go wrong, these blind spots will contribute their own set of cascading failures that can accelerate a crisis and even push a company into a slow motion death spiral. In postmortems of disaster-related business failures, the following 3 blind spots are at the top of every list of how and why the business had to tap out. First is weak decision-making authority. Whatever the underlying causes were, they were not able to make effective decisions quickly enough to be able to change the course of events. Next is poor communications. Now this is, speaks to emergency communications as well as crisis communications, and we'll go into the differences in a little bit later. And the last are ad hoc reactions. By not having plans in place, weak decision-making authority, poor communications, a company is forced to shoot from the lip and from the hip in reacting to the event at hand. So one way to avoid these risky blind spots is to use accepted standards for guidance when building a business continuity program, or any program for that matter, right? It reduces the time to implement a program, provides objective content and context for reference, and it demonstrates appropriate rigor in the program development process for the audits. So this slide provides only a handful of options, but the key takeaway is this. To be successful, it's important that you apply a standard or standards that fit your business model and corporate culture, aligns with your regulatory environment, and supports what is already in place and works for your organization. So following this approach keeps the board and executive leadership aware of its risk governance responsibilities and will result in a documented governance program that is process enabled, the how-tos are there, and auditable. And this is the best of all worlds. So what can we, well, emergency stages. Let's speak about the phases of an event. So what can we expect when a potential threat becomes a reality? Some events will produce empirically verifiable impact. We can see, taste, touch the damage that's been produced. Other disruptive events will have a soft impact. That is to say that they're unseen. They happen in the back alleys of cyberspace or the innermost parts of a person's body, but their damage can be just as devastating to a company's survival as a hurricane. So regardless of the source of impact, every crisis afflicted company, there we go. Every crisis afflicted company moves through 3 stages of emergency related activities. And these stages are the response stage, the restoration stage, and ultimately the recovery stage, back to normal, the new normal. So let's dive into each to learn a little bit more. The response stage. So this is when the disruptive event is just about to happen or is currently active and demands immediate action on the part of your team. So the threat is active, it's threatening your people, your places, or your important things, requires immediate action. That includes the incident response team, your company and third parties, and community coordination as well. And then communications obviously are a key element at all times. So the flow of your engagement model works like this. The event occurs, detection is made, the emergency management or the incident response team is mobilized, they assess the event, and then build a response to that event. So that's the response stage. So the restoration stage starts when the immediate danger is past. The emergency first responders, they've left your site, and now the emergency management team takes over control of the situation. It becomes an in-house event now. So first and foremost, you need to determine the status of all your personnel. Injury reports, personnel availability for the restoration efforts. Are there any fatalities? Then you need to begin to develop situational awareness. What have we lost? What emergency level are we operating at? So that includes conducting damage assessments, impact reports, and prioritizing your resources. And your continuity and communication plans are active and in place. Finally, the restoration stage or the recovery stage is achieved. So this is when all the lost capabilities and capacities are near to or at 100%. So coordination with external agencies works in the context of site access and occupancy being approved. You've returned to pre-event levels or really close to it. Employees are ready, leadership's ready, stakeholders are notified. And then close to as possible, the end of the event, you want to conduct the after action review and report so you can determine what went well and what didn't, implement your lessons learned, and update your documentation. So let's take a look at this nebulous and nefarious thing called risk and supporting elements, something called the business impact analysis or BIA. So every organization needs to understand its operational risks to be available to achieve the resiliency and availability goals. It's kind of like that old project management saying, how can you manage what doesn't get measured, right? So in this context, we're talking about cause and effect. So let's take a moment to explore 3 key elements that comprise this thing called risk. First, there needs to be significant assets or areas that are important to your organization. So these can be your people, your places, or your things. Next, those significant assets or areas, are they threatened by something? The source category could either be natural, man-made, or technological. And the cause of the event can come from one source category or a combination. And we also want to define during this process if the threat is adversarial or non-adversarial. Is it just a bad luck, or is somebody out to make your life difficult purposely? And then finally, are those significant assets vulnerable to those threats? So we need to ask, where are we vulnerable? Is it our systems, dependencies we have, our vendors and suppliers? And what are we vulnerable to? Are we vulnerable to an active threat, a failure event, or downtime of some nature? And if all 3 elements are present, there's a risk that should be explored further. We haven't determined at this point, or you haven't determined at this point, the probability or the impact, but it does speak to the fact that there's some type of risk there that should be explored a little further. So not all risks are created equal. However, most will tend to follow recognizable patterns, so plans can be made to avoid or mitigate their impact. So how do we objectively measure or score the risk that's being examined? Well, most of the plans I have seen use a numerical scale of 1 to 3 or 1 to 5. Personally, I encourage the use of a numerical scale of 1 to 10 for scoring risks, but whatever measurement scale you use, the inquiry process looks for answers to what can go wrong, how likely is it to occur, and if it does happen, are there consequences? So please keep in mind, during this process, this is not a measure of good versus bad, or of one part of your business being more important than another. The goal is to objectively identify where your most vulnerable and time-sensitive business operations are, so investments can be made to protect them or to prioritize their recovery in a crisis. So where do we start our risk discovery? Where do we start our risk discovery efforts? That's a good question. So my encouragement to you is to start in these 5 areas that you see on the slide. This approach will provide you with a good overview of your company's risk universe. And the risk areas are, from the upper right corner, the external risks. So you want to look outside of your organization. Then you want to turn your focus inward. So facility-wide risks, and this could be a single location, multiple locations. Another area what you want to look at is your voice and data networks. You need to look for risk in your departments at the business function or process levels. And then ultimately, at the production floor or the desktop, your work area risks. So again, we're looking for significant assets. Are there threats to them, and are they vulnerable to those threats? So now, to identify specific threats and vulnerabilities that may be lurking within each of these areas, there's 6 impact categories to help you guide you through your discovery efforts. So make a note that they are your people, processes, the technology that's in use, infrastructure, the financial elements, and then last, dependencies. So it's the filter you're looking, or the prism that you're looking through. Each of these areas are your people, processes, technology, infrastructure, the financial impact, and the dependencies in each of these risk areas. So remember when you took a test in school, your work was first scored and then assigned a grade based on the score, right? Well, the same concept is used here. I believe that defined guidance is a critical component of success in risk scoring, but it's often inadvertently overlooked. So by sharing with your department leaders how a risk is scored and how it will be defined, you can be confident that the data you collect from the boardroom down to the boiler room used a common frame of reference in the process. So other key benefits include its contributions to a common risk-based language that's used within the organization. My favorite is that it helps negate opinion-based resistance. I don't think, I don't feel, that doesn't seem like it. Here's an objective standard, and everybody's expected to score their risks based on that standard. It's also very effective in helping to assign tier levels for recovery, for your systems, for budgetary needs, and people as well. And it supports objective decision-making. In this way, choices that are made after this process, they're risk-informed and not risk-based. So disruptive events can have a widespread impact on a company. So this is why it's mission critical to ensure that the business does not have gaps or surprises in its overall BCM, or business continuity management, or DR program, disaster recovery program. So while there are numerous areas to focus on when conducting a BIA, the Disaster Recovery Institute International, the DRII, identifies the following areas of impact worthy of primary consideration. They are the human impact, the operational impact, GRC, or governance, risk, and compliance, finances, or customer impact, and then last, your brand value or reputational impact. So now we have these areas of impact and the probability and what may happen. Let's take some time to learn about classifying these events, because not every event's a fire truck, right? So classifications levels are used to quickly communicate the scope of an event, just how bad capabilities and capacities have been affected. So you'll see various definitions used in different plans. However, these are ones I rely on. We'll move from the lowest impact at the bottom of the screen to the highest impact as we migrate up. So first is hazards and vulnerabilities. And none of these definitions are carved in stone. I just want to throw that out there. So these are can be looked at as short-term, low-impact events that could escalate if they're not properly addressed. So unattended hazards can grow into a vulnerability. Now, if this hazard that has progressed into a vulnerability hasn't been addressed, it could turn into a disruption. And generally, a disruption requires a commitment of some resources and time from the company, but it's generally limited in scope and scale, and overall business operations can remain unaffected in most situations. Consider dividing this classification into two subcategories: a temporary disruption and a short-term disruption. And both of these will be defined by the BAA process. Next is an emergency. This is a disruption or a pending disruption that's increasing in size, severity, scope, or speed, or it could be a flash event that requires immediate mobilization of the incident response team to assess and respond to the event, especially if injuries or deaths have occurred. An emergency generally results in operational constraints because the impact level requires an immediate commitment of resources, time, and corporate focus with little to no warning. The next progression would be a disaster. So generally, this requires most, if not all, business operations to be suspended for appropriate safety reasons, but also it'll exceed multiple recovery time objectives while impacting multiple departments and/or critical business functions. A disaster results in constraints of loss and restrictions, and generally will exceed the company's capacity to respond at that point in time. And by capacity, we mean they know what they would want to do, but they just don't have the people, the time, the finances, the trucks, whatever capacity and resources needed to effectively respond. And finally is a catastrophe. And the characteristics of a catastrophe include open-ended recovery times and open-ended costs. Will blow past maximum tolerable downtimes, and worst of all, it will eclipse the company's capability to respond. We just don't know what to do right now. So think the city of New Orleans and Katrina, for example. So now for the audience participation segment of our program. Ta-da! I have a $25 gift card from Panera for the first person with the correct answer to what is inside this box. So we ask you to type your answer into the chat bar for your shot at the gift card. And it's not a riddle, so you will get a clue. Okay, and if you all are ready, the clue is, what is the greatest danger lurking in any crisis event? So our clue to this, to our challenge is, what is the greatest danger lurking in any crisis event? Let's see if I can open this. Okay, let me change you to presenter if you have any questions. Unpreparedness. Okay, close, but not quite what we're looking for. Dig a little deeper, folks. The greatest danger, so the commonality is any event that occurs, this will be lurking in the background. The unknown, that's close. That's real close, Leah. Okay. Any other ideas, folks? There's no right or wrong answers. We're just looking to try and, well, there is there's one right answer, but we're nobody will be penalized for anything that's not. The gift box is also a hint. Okay, nice. Thanks, Tara. Okay, how about birds? How about, okay, this for a clue, swans. So some of you may have heard things about swans of some label or another, some type or another. Does that help? Okay, well, you seem to have run out of guesses. Okay, well, I guess maybe we'll just wrap this up so we can keep flowing here. And what we were looking for in this context was, okay, come on, screen.
Yeah, answered in the chat box, surprises.
Yes. Here's new share, no. Screen 2. Hold on, guys. Sorry, for some reason I've lost my controls here and I can't advance the slide. There we go. Ta-da! Surprise. So that's what we were looking for.
Leah did get it because she wrote in chat surprise. Surprising.
Hey,
so
way to go, Leah. We do have a winner. Ta-da! Okay. Well, always strive, and the encouragement is through all of this, to always strive to look beyond the horizon of your known risk universe. So this will help your team avoid focusing only on the threats that you know or the current threat landscape. So expanding your team's view of risk, you can leave the surprises into birthday parties and anniversaries. So thank you all for participating and congratulations to our winner, Leah. So back to the task at hand. So as we discussed, a risk assessment identifies significant assets and qualifies or measures threats and vulnerabilities within that company's risk universe. Well, the BIA then supports that process by quantifying these same risks from a business impact and a process loss side. So in other words, what is the cost penalty in lost time, scope, resources, and most importantly, dollars? So here's an easy way to remember the focus of the business impact analysis. Primary objective of the BIA is to identify the impact and the loss potential on the company if any department or business function is unavailable for any reason. The for any reason speaks to what's called an all hazards methodology. Because the BIA process is not a mitigation or a continuity strategy effort, it's not too concerned about the cause, just the effect on the company if any department or business function is unavailable. So for BCM and DR planning, you'll use the risk assessment to qualify the full scope of threats, vulnerabilities, and probabilities, and then hot wash that with the business impact analysis to quantify potential losses and establish critical timeframes. So the process flow reads from left to right in figure 5.0 there on the right half of the screen, and it can be summarized in 4 steps. So make a note that the 4 steps are: first, the raw data is harvested. So we gather our source data. We perform a data analysis and classifications, validate the analysis results with the department head or representative that provided the answers to our questions or responses in our workshops, and then we'll report on the findings. So harvest the data, we gather the source data, the raw source data. Next, we analyze it, we turn it into actionable information. We validate what we've, our results of the analysis process with the group or individual that provided it with it to us, and then we'll report on those findings. And that provides the risk intelligence for the organization to move forward with. Excuse me. So dependencies. The risk assessment in the BIA identifies each department in the company, critical business functions, and what their contributions are to what drives earnings. So to understand the full impact of a department or a critical function being unavailable, we need to take a look at what their dependencies are, what that department needs to function, and what others are looking to receive from that department. So a basic black box type of review: input, process, and output. So the dependency review looks at what each department function needs from the systems it relies on, the vendors and suppliers, and the inter and intra dependencies. So the intra-company, dependencies, and then the inter dependencies that are outside organizations or companies that they rely on. And remember to pay attention to both upstream and downstream impacts as are represented by the dominoes, because the dominoes can fall in either direction and they could fall simultaneously. So upstream and downstream impacts. Now, there's someone ask, hey, is this really necessary? Seems like a lot of work. Well, the truth is, whoops, wait a minute. Key performance indicators. Missed that slide. So having a common risk-based language, avoids confusion, there's something, and helps accurately profile risks to the company with the highest impact and potential to occur. So this information will then guide the creation of continuity and risk management strategies on down the road. So used in pre-event readiness, this common risk-based language effectively conveys functional requirements, technology requirements, and risk management priorities at all operational levels. There'll be just a handful of KPIs on the slide here that your company needs to know. And the good news is the BIA report will help you establish what they are, so you don't have to guess at it. First is minimum operating level. What does that department or that business function need to operate in a minimum level? Next would be recovery time objectives. And this speaks to the maximum time of unavailability. So RTOs, I like to look at this in the context of restoration time objectives and marry that with work recovery time objectives, but that's a whole nother story. So traditionally, recovery time objectives, recovery point objectives or RPOs. This speaks to how much data you can lose. From your last backup, how much data could be lost before it becomes a catastrophic issue for your organization. And next would be maximum tolerable downtime. And this identifies catastrophic levels of downtime for the organization, that department, or that business function. Okay, so now, is all this really necessary? Well, the truth is, business interruptions are not static events. The old saying, time is money, never truer than when preparing budgets to mitigate potential risks or when responding to the reality of a failure event or downtime. Availability comes at a cost, but so does unavailability. The closer that availability gets to zero downtime, immediate failover, well, wheelbarrows full of money are going to need to be thrown at that process. However, zeros can be added to downtime costs at an alarming rate the longer it takes to restore and recover operations, as the minutes turn into hours, days, and weeks. So it's a delicate balancing act, to be sure. And this is why accurate KPIs are the foundation for improved executive decision-making, accurate budget allocations, and protecting the equity position of all the company's stakeholders. So let's pivot now to where the answers live, resiliency and continuity plans. Now, we've talked about resiliency and availability. What do we mean? Well, while these terms may sound interchangeable, they have entirely different meanings and need to be properly accounted for in your continuity planning process. The dictionary definition of resiliency speaks to something's ability to return to its original shape or to bounce back from a stress. So in the world of continuity, this is attained by a system design or support process. By reducing potential points of failure through designing or training, the system inherently becomes more resilient. So for example, we have a tier 3 N+1 data center design, and we have everything duplicated. 2 generators, 2 transfer switches, 2 sets of UPSs that are fully redundant, all the way down to the IT load in the data center. Another example is of a resilient backup topography would be, we have local backups, cloud backups, secondary cloud backup, tapes that are stored off-site. So we can be able to get this data back if we need it to meet our RPOs, right? Tie back into the KPIs. And on a more human nature or level, we have a young married couple that have a baby on the way, and that old hand-me-down car that's been serving them well over the past year or so, with the child on the way, they want to upgrade and have a more resilient vehicle. So they invested in a brand new machine. They got the keys and they moved forward. So let's talk about availability, because availability, on the other hand, speaks to how that same resilient system is maintained, supported, or secured by processes that make that system available when it's needed. So in the lives of our young couple here, you notice the keys, the 2 keys that came with the car, are both on the same key ring. So if they don't have a process in place, if they don't split these up so each one has a key and they're managed independently and in a cohesive way, if they lost that one ring of keys, that highly resilient vehicle is not going to be available to them when they need it. Our resilient backup topography, if we have a system administrator or administrative rights are not secured properly, passwords are not maintained, we could have a single individual that has control of all the passwords not be available when it's needed. So we won't be able to access our data because we don't have the passwords. Or if proper cyber hygiene isn't a part of the corporate culture, malware could lock us out from our data. So it won't be available. And down to our data center power delivery system. If the generators aren't maintained properly, if the diesel fuel isn't mixed, the batteries on the UPSs or the UPSs aren't properly maintained, that highly resilient system could fail and not be available to us at a key point in time. So all of this to say, remember to address both the resiliency and the availability needs of your most vulnerable and time-sensitive operations when building your business continuity strategies. So this publication from FEMA is a great resource for your family and your corporate workforce. I encourage the use of this resource to all my clients because it's a natural behavioral tendency to take care of your own family first in a crisis. And that holds true even for emergency first responders. So without your people, there's no hope of recovering the business. And no matter how committed your workforce is to its success, it won't be able to begin the restoration process. So this resource will provide you with the checklists and the forms needed to protect your family and its finances. So just Google the publication number at the top of the slide, the FEMA P-2063, and you'll be able to get a copy for yourself and your organization. So while few business continuity laws are on the books, there is a growing body of legal precedents that speaks to the fiduciary obligations of board members and corporate officers to prepare their organization for reasonable and foreseeable threats. And that's a key phrase. So disaster avoidance as a corporate strategy can occur at three and should occur at three different levels. First is the policy level. This is strategic in nature, and this is where the policies are created by the board and corporate officers. Gets pushed down then to the middle management level, more tactical in nature. The policies are implemented throughout the ecosystem of the organization. Then ultimately down to the operational level. Policies are applied and they're process enabled. The how-tos come into play. So at each level, continuity or risk management strategies can be applied to help ensure the success of your operations and the safety of your workforce. So we've defined risk, discussed where it lives and steps to avoid it. But now what can we do with it? Because all risks are not created equal, different decision-making strategies will fit at different times and for various reasons. However, all strategies fit into four basic risk management categories. First, the risk can be avoided. Whatever options are being evaluated, just don't follow through with them. That M&A or the merger and acquisition, it looks great on the balance sheet, but brings many expensive risk exposures with it. Don't go there, cancel it. How about that legacy software you can't get security updates for, say Windows 7, for example? Avoid the risk, retire that system and replace with a securable operating system. Next strategy is to mitigate the risks. I like to come at this from two different directions, and those would be reducing and containing the risk. So reducing the risk involves putting controls in place that lower the likelihood of the threat occurring. An example from the pandemic is wearing a mask to reduce the potential of getting or giving the virus. Another risk reducing strategy is to stay at home, or that's where the work from home strategy came from for organizations. One containment strategy, again using the pandemic example, would be to quarantine at home if a person was potentially exposed to the virus. And for someone who has become infected, a different risk containment strategy would be to enter isolation at home to avoid spreading the virus to others that live in the house or to coworkers back at the office. Next, we can transfer the risk. And the example that comes to most people's mind is insurance, and that is a great example of how this risk management strategy can be applied. Another example would be to outsource the risk to an entity better equipped to handle it. So for example, let's say we're a laboratory that processes non-radioactive samples, but we get a shot at a large contract that includes handling a small percentage of radioactive material. So instead of using the avoidance strategy and turning down the contract and the potential financial benefits, we could enter into a strategic partnership with a qualified company that does handle radioactive material and thereby transfer the risk to them. And last, we may just have to accept the risk. Some aspects of doing business involve inherent or residual risks that are just too costly to effectively address. And acceptance is the only meaningful approach that's available to us. So now there is a fifth unspoken approach that unfortunately many companies attempt to employ at their own peril, and that is to ignore the risk. So America's current COVID pandemic is a prime example of what can go wrong when a high impact risk is ignored or appropriate risk management strategies are not thoroughly applied. So as a Hall of Fame football coach, Vince Lombardi was attributed to have said, luck is not a strategy. So let's review what we've covered so far. We have three phases of emergency-related activities. First is the response stage. Next is the restoration stage. And finally, the recovery stage. So we also discussed the danger of risky blind spots, weak decision-making authority, poor communications, and ad hoc reactions, and the importance of using industry standards when creating our continuity plans. So in each emergency phase, we need to avoid the blind spots, performance gaps, and surprises. There you go, Leah. to have any hope of saving lives, livelihoods, and the company's future. So it's been my experience that all standards share 3 problem-solving fundamentals. And when these fundamentals are in place, organizational blind spots begin to fade and clarity starts to take over. So the first of these 3 steps in building a resilient and available organization is to establish command and control for your company. There has to be someone or a group of someone's in charge of assessing the threat, strategy development, and rolling out a response plan. The next step is communications. The decision-making authority has to be able to communicate to have any hope of gathering situational awareness and to coordinate successful outcomes. So this will speak to the emergency communications as well as crisis communications. And we'll delve into that in a couple of slides. And the third step is some coordinated response capabilities. Someone needs to be ready, willing, and able, and that means trained, to implement the incident response plans. So these are the tactical support teams, the tip of the spear, if you will, that are responsible for the successful implementation of any strategy. So let's take a closer look at each step. Step 1, this is a sample framework for your emergency management team. Depending on the size of your organization, you may have 1 or 2 people wear many hats, or many individuals with specific roles will be assigned to them. Regardless of the structure, and don't let the structure throw you. Regardless of the structure, the important takeaway here is to have the strategic capability in place prior to an event occurring and before progressing any further in developing your continuity plan. It's that important, and here's why. Once a disruptive event occurs, the organization needs to be ready to engage the event and to manage to the level of need. Time will be of the essence, and that is why pre-planning and training saves lives, avoids career-defining moments, and can help any company avoid disaster. So in order to properly engage in a disruptive event, your emergency management team needs to be in place, trained, and ready to implement the engagement model flow that we talked about a little earlier. The team structure that's on the slide here was just a sample from a bomb threat program I have. It's just representative of the fact that you want to have people in place to support your response. And the response, again, is the event occurs, detection of the event has happened, the emergency management team or your command and control process has been notified and they're mobilized. They can begin the process of assessing just how bad is bad, classifying this event, and then ultimately building the response to the event. So here's an example of how this can work. In this example, we have a if-then decision tree, and I encourage each of you to start any plan development effort by building a flow chart for that specific task. That could be whiteboarded, or on the back of a table napkin, doesn't matter. And then add your processes and procedures. An additional benefit is that by developing visual maps to your process, it's much easier to apply in a disaster than reading a Word document, and especially for someone who's not familiar with the task. There are many different applications that are available to support your efforts. I use Lucidchart. They're based in Utah, and their user interface is easy to use and intuitive. But whatever application or program or however you approach this, you want to have on this slide, the event is detected in some if-then flow outlining your response. So for example, is there a potential impact on our departments or functions? No, it's a low level event, maybe a hazard or a vulnerability. So we treat it as such. Yes. Are personnel in threat, are danger? Are they threatened? Yes. It's a high priority event, and saddle up the horses and you need to get rolling. No, it's undetermined. You need to ask then, are there key indicators that are being triggered, your KPIs, anything at risk of being exceeded? Yes. Prioritize as a high threat event. No or undetermined. Significant impact. No. It's a low level event and respond to that accordingly. If it's undetermined, again, err on the side of caution and approach it as a high level event. Again, this is just an example. So engagement flow or incident response. So the incident response flow on this slide outlines all hazards approach for responding to a wide range of disruptions. However, that's not to say that specific incident plans shouldn't be created. You should create specific plans for high probability and high impact events that are identified in the BIA. So think a hurricane response plan, for example. So incident response actions are intended to first and foremost protect and preserve human life, maintain critical business capabilities and capacities, and focus on limiting damage to company assets. So this response flow outlines a five-step process to guide the incident response team in determining a course of action once the threat has been detected and the team has been mobilized. So first we need to understand the threat and its potential impact. Next, the response strategy needs to be developed and agreed upon. Then that strategy needs to be pushed out to all relevant stakeholders. So there's our communications requirements. And then fourth, speaks to the tactical implementation of the strategy that's been communicated. So ultimately, once the danger is past, we can then safely move into step 5 at the very bottom of this rung and transition to restoration phase activities. So everything we've talked about in this example, step 1 through 4, relate to the response element to the event. So in closing, the incident response plan provides a flexible set of guidelines to make effective problem-solving decisions under fast-moving, uncertain, and difficult circumstances. But it needs to be developed, practiced, and maintained for it to be effective when needed. So redundant and available communications. I found it helpful to present 2 separate categories for communication section of a continuity program. And the reason is simple. It's just too important to not get right. Communication is key to saving lives and makes everything in your plan work. However, I have found it to be one of the most overlooked, underdeveloped components in the business continuity programs I've seen. So in a moment, we'll touch on 2 different forms of communication. One is emergency communications, and the second is crisis communications. They sound a lot alike, but they're 2 entirely different focuses. But first, I'd like to share a framework that you can use when constructing any emergency communication plan. And that framework is built on the acronym PACE, P-A-C-E. And that stands for having a primary communications capability, an alternate capability, a contingency or a tertiary or 3rd level, and the 4th is E, emergency. So PACE, primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. The example on this slide is from a bomb threat program, but it applies to any emergency communications plan. So the key takeaway is to look to build in as much redundancy as you can, ideally using the PACE framework, so you can be confident that you can stay connected regardless of circumstances. So now let's talk about these 2 forms of communications I've alluded to. So first is emergency communications. So these are the people, processes, and systems used to communicate emergency messages. It's not the message, but it's how the message gets delivered to those who need it. So it speaks to the systems, the modalities, if you will, that can be used to communicate. Text, cell phone, shortwave, runners, paging, whatever systems you have available to your organization. You want to document them through the risk and business impact analysis process so that you can then fold them into your countermeasures that are applied via your continuity program or COOP program. The second is crisis communications. Now, this is where your message management focus. This is what's being said, who is saying it, and who is the audience. So if you are not controlling the narrative of your crisis, it's a safe bet that others will do that for you, and you will not like the results. So this sets the tone, the tempo, and the intent of your messaging. Represents a constant two-way communication. You want to speak in a human tone. You don't want to have legalese involved in your crisis communication messages. And this includes all stakeholders, both internal and external. So let's explore an example of each for additional clarity. So an example of an emergency communications process would be what to do when you see something, how to do it, when to do it, who needs to be contacted, and most importantly, how, and what to expect is the response and next steps. So this process can be visually represented in the flow diagram that's like on the slide. This is an example of an insider threat flow. Perhaps someone is seen on site that's a stranger, they have a backpack, they're acting a little nervous, they're in places where perhaps people normally don't go, and they set the backpack down and walk away with talking on their phone. Well, the event occurs, comes to the attention of staff, gets forwarded to X in this process. X alerts a task force about that event. Decision is made, and then the proper teams are alerted. But if you notice, something very important is missing. And what's missing is the how those alerts and messages get to where they're supposed to go. So is a special number to be dialed on the phone? Do we know what the number is? Is it documented? Do we need to use the overhead paging system? So the how-tos of sending the message and what tools are used to send it and who needs to receive it are some of the most frequently overlooked elements in a continuity plan, but it won't be in yours. So one last thought, be sure everyone in the company knows what to do and how to do it, as anyone can become an initial responder at any point in time. So crisis communications. In today's always-on, media-driven world, you need to be prepared to control what's being said about your company. Your crisis communications plan, then, is the process used to develop and deliver what is said in the messaging your organization provides to stakeholders, to victims, to families, and the media in the aftermath of an event. An additional benefit to having a crisis communications plan is that it serves as a guide to executive leadership on their role in this process, helps them avoid making a bad situation worse with self-defeating behaviors or messaging. So this is very important because in a crisis, all stakeholders expect three things from the afflicted company. They expect that organization to act responsibly, to be truthful at all times. Yes, that does still matter, and that it hold itself accountable. So this is why it's important to have a trained spokesperson or team ready to provide thoughtful, positive responses to questions and colorful commentary as they occur, either in traditional medias or on social media. And keeping the record straight and controlling the narrative of the event is essential to preserving your company's reputation and will give it a measure of control over its destiny as events unfold. So one last thing to mention about communications is to make sure you maintain accurate communications list and any key supporting information. The formatting and style is not as important as the ease of use, accessibility, and security of those lists. So here are just a couple examples for you. Employee recall lists, vendors, and key stakeholders, just to name a few. So step 3, the coordinated response. Your organization's emergency actions are handled by your incident response and safety team. This team is the eyes, ears, and the hands of the emergency management team. Now, smaller organization, you all might be wearing both sets of hats. But again, this is just a sample framework. And this framework that you see on the slide is based on the NIMS framework, or a National Incident Management System framework. Again, it's just a sample, and it is expected to be modified based on your individual needs and personnel constraints. But regardless of the number of employees or assigned roles, the mission is straightforward. You always need to provide for the safety and the welfare of all your employees and personnel that may be on site. So here's an example of a tactical mission team. Generally, teams with a specific mission will roll up under the incident response team. However, for illustration purposes, I presented this example of a crisis communications team with a standalone framework. So regardless of the team's mission, it's not the number of individuals that are available that's important, but that the support role that they provide is accounted for in your continuity program in a meaningful way. So as we draw to a close, I think we've got about 15 minutes left. I would just like to remind everyone that no matter what phase of an emergency you're in, it's imperative to maintain a constant feedback loop between the incident response team and are not static. They're constantly changing. So it's very important for workforce safety and your company's survival to remain connected and agile. So this way, adjustments can be quickly made and communicated as events unfold or change. So last couple slides speak to resources. So I'd just like to remind you of the FEMA document that we introduced a little bit earlier, and that's the Emergency Financial First Aid Kit. This particular version is just the checklist and forms. There is a sister version of this. It has a little more of the whys and what fors, if you will. But this is a good one because it just has the checklist and the forms, and you can get right to work in gathering your data. Again, that's FEMA publication P-2063. And then get ready resources for actually building your continuity program. So for templated forms and checklists, CISA is a great resource. It's a cybersecurity infrastructure and security agency. They have a tremendous resource category or catalog for cybersecurity and all things related to your infrastructure, if you're a utility company or a government agency, as well as just a small to medium-sized business with the day-to-day needs for cybersecurity. FEMA is another great resource that I think you all are very familiar with them, speaks for themselves. The name speaks for itself. And again, great resource for pre-formatted templates and forms. The Insurance Institute for Business, Home and Safety, a great local resource in Florida, but it's also available nationwide. They have a wonderful program called Open for Business. It has all of the forms that you need to, that will walk you step by step through documenting a continuity program for a small to medium-sized business. So a wonderful resource there. Another resource is the National Fire Prevention Association. Don't let the name fool you. They were the first organization, I believe, that codified the business continuity process for the private sector. And the publication that they have is NFPA 1600, I think 2019 is the last version. There's others. Disaster Recovery Institute International has the 10 professional practices. That's more for more of a medium to larger organization. And this NFPA process here will be a little bit more larger organizations, resource that's effective for them. And American Red Cross. We all know the Red Cross. They're great for employee safety and how to perform first aid. And of course, your state, regional, and local emergency management agencies are a treasure trove of resources and support for your company's success. So it looks like we have a few minutes left for questions or to war game ideas. Would anyone like to comment on what might have been left out or a topic that you think we would want to discuss further?
We do not have any posted questions so far.
I will give everybody a minute. There must have been something here. Hopefully I didn't bore everyone to tears. We do have a few minutes left. If there's no questions, we can let everybody get back to their day a few minutes early. Sure, no one will object to that. We need to get Leah's email address, if you could, Tara, at your convenience.
Michelle reached out to Leah, so that we'll get that over to you.
Okay, terrific, thank you. And with that, are we looking to wrap things up, Tara?
Yes, thank you so much, Robert, for a great presentation. I know certainly I learned a lot and a lot of great resources out there. So if anyone does have any additional questions, feel free to reach out and we will connect with Robert and get you some answers. So, and I want to also thank Commissioner Lockhart and Alan Harris for joining us today. Thank you so much for your time and good luck and on your journey to being resilient.
Thank you all.
Now.